So I can see the numbers are still building, but I think we'll make a start just because we've got a lot to fit into the hour. So welcome everyone to this BCO webinar on neurodiversity in design. This session promises to be a really interesting and engaging session in such an important topic area. Before we get started, just to mention that there's information in the chat box as to how the audience members can ask questions. You can pop them in there and then upvote questions, and we'll try to get to the questions in the last 10 minutes. By way of a very brief introduction, I'm Dr. Paul Hanna, a chartered psychologist based at Hoare. I have a background in mental health and community psychology, hence why I'm chairing this, I guess. And I'll just go round the room for the panelists to introduce themselves. So if I could start with Jean.
Hello everyone, so I'm Jean Hewitt. I was appointed by the BSI to be the technical author for the PAS 6463, which is the Design for the Mind, Neurodiversity in the Built Environment Standard, which was published late last year. And my day job is an inclusive environments specialist at Buro Happold. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I'll go to Ruth now.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Kelly Waskett. I'm also from Hoare and I'm part of the lighting team there. So I have a particular interest in how lighting works for people with neurodiversity.
Thank you, Ruth. And Diane?
Thank you. I'm Diane Lightfoot. I am CEO of Business Disability Forum. We are a charity and a membership organisation that works with almost 600 businesses across the private, public and voluntary sectors and many different sectors within that. Collectively, our members employ about 20% of the UK workforce, and we help them to get better at recruiting and retaining disabled employees and at serving disabled customers. And within that definition of disability, we include neurodiversity, which is something I'm sure we'll come on to later.
Thank you very much, Diane. And finally, last but by no means least, Jesse.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Klimitz, and my pronouns are he, him. And I'm the Global Director of Human Space, which is BDP's inclusive design practice. And I'm an architect by training and have been working in the inclusive design arena for over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much, Jesse. So to get things started, I guess we're going to open this up with a bit of a discussion by way of what neurodiversity means. And I think this is a fascinating area and certainly something that's been debated a lot in my discipline. So to kick things off, I'd like to go to Diane to just give us an insight into what diversity means to you and your work and why you feel it matters.
Thanks, Paul. So neurodiversity is a term that was coined in 1998, and I think it depends on how old you are, whether you think that's quite recent or a very long time ago. And it refers to people who quite literally think differently, whose brains are wired differently. And common conditions that are referred to under neurodiversity as an umbrella include dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. I have to really concentrate to say that one. Acquired brain injury and other neurological conditions. And it's a subject that has massively gone up the agenda in terms of awareness in recent years and continues to do so. So it's great that we're having this event today. From what we see, it's also a deeply personal subject that really goes to the heart of a lot of people's identities. And people may talk about neurodiversity in different ways, and I'm sure that will happen during this webinar. So some people prefer to use terms like neurodivergent or neurominority or neuroatypical, and some people prefer to use the term neuroinclusion rather than neurodiversity. But we tend to use neurodiversity as the most widely understood and accepted, even if it's not technically accurate in that we are all, by definition, neurodiverse. And as I said in the introduction, I'm from Business Disability Forum. So is neurodiversity a disability? And hopefully, I'm going to say possibly. So in the UK, the legislation that we work under in this space is the UK Equality Act 2010, and it defines disability as a physical or a mental condition which has a substantial and long-term impact on your ability to do normal day-to-day activities. So it may be, depending on how somebody is impacted. But really importantly, having given a definition, I think this is about enabling people to thrive. So someone who is neurodivergent may not consider themselves to have a disability or at all identify with the term disabled, but might need support in the shape of workplace adjustments, in the shape of inclusive design or different environmental design. In terms of why this matters, actually, this isn't a small minority. So figures from ACAS show that 1 in 7 people in the UK is neurodiverse, and most people who are neurodiverse have more than one condition. And for us as a business membership organisation, we are seeing an increasing interest in this from our members and partners who are realising that they need to recruit a more diverse in every sense workforce enabled to thrive. And of course, this is partly about skills shortages and businesses not being able to overlook any part of the talent pool. But it's also about realising that they are more productive. So Harvard Business Review back in 2017 found that neurodiverse teams can be up to 30% more productive than non-neurodiverse teams, which is really, really quite a gap. So we are seeing that businesses want to recruit differently because they know that brings better creativity, better innovation, it better reflects the needs of all your clients and customer groups, it avoids groupthink, all those things. But particularly for us, and why it matters so much, that people often don't get the right support in the workplace. So a manager may not know that somebody is neurodiverse or has a condition, and indeed actually the person themselves may not know, because diagnosis is still very often something that happens later in life. It's very often a privilege. There's a whole piece around intersectionality here as well. So when we think about autism, for example, the classic image of autism is actually a straight white male definition, and actually it looks very, very different in women, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds and of different ethnicities. So actually understanding who's in your workforce and how best to support them is something that we support businesses with a lot. And to give a couple of examples of why it matters. So we get lots of calls to our advice service about performance, and one quite frequent one is having a member of staff who is about to have to go under a performance management process because they are not achieving the right speed or level of accuracy in their written work. And it may be that they've got undiagnosed or unsupported dyslexia. And another one where this is a very specific example, someone at an event told me they'd taken on a graduate in an engineering role, a graduate with autism who was doing brilliantly, but the rest of the team was saying that he didn't fit. And this was because they didn't understand that he was autistic and thinking about how he communicated. So there is real risk that brilliant talent goes to waste and people fall out of the workforce because they are not being supported properly. So I'm sure we will talk more about adjustments. I'm sure we will talk a lot about the environment. And so I would just say this is about talent. This is about enabling everyone in your workforce to thrive.
Thank you, Diane. Some really, really interesting points raised there. And I think you really reminded me of a lot of the research that came out a few years ago around young females in the UK going undiagnosed because of the fact that they didn't meet the criteria on the basis that the criteria for autism was largely written for how it manifests as behaviours in boys. So yeah, really, really great. Right, so I'm going to stop ranting on. Sorry. Let's go to Ruth now for the same question. So what does it mean to you, and why does it matter?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, that was Diane. That was fantastic, because I don't know about everyone else, but like I've learned a lot just from listening to you just now. And I think my understanding of neurodiversity, obviously there's different levels here personally and as a professional. Coming at it as a professional, I feel really as many of us do, very strongly that we need to design buildings that work for people. And that means all kinds of people. And what I really like about this conversation is that it does connect with just what you might call inclusive design. And I know that's very much what Jean's role is. So, you know, thinking more broadly about inclusivity in the sense that some of these issues overlap with things that can happen to anyone at any stage of their life. It can also intersect with age and even just cultural differences and periods of all of our lives when we might be under particular stress or be suffering with ill mental health. So I feel as if from a design point of view, designing for neurodiversity is about embracing you know, it leads us to a wider conversation about inclusivity, and I think that's really positive. And also, as a lighting professional, I'm obviously really excited about this area because lighting is so crucial. And you know, from my understanding, you know, lighting it has huge potential in both directions here, because it can be very disruptive. It can actually exacerbate bad behavior or negative behaviors, I should say, in some settings, but it can also prevent people from communicating effectively and interrupt their thought process, both because of the fact that it is electronic equipment at the end of the day, but also it has such a profound effect on the environment and on how everything appears. Also, I have a particular interest in daylight and natural light, and I feel that this has been picked up in the past as well, that that natural light can be a key component here, because it tends to you know, it doesn't carry some of the same issues as artificial light. For example, it doesn't involve equipment that can emit noise or create flicker. With daylight, I'm not saying everything is always perfect, because obviously if you have too much direct sunlight, that can cause problems too. And if someone is particularly sensitive, that will be even worse for them. So we have to be careful about how we use daylight, but I do feel very strongly that natural light can be the key, especially, you know, in this setting where we're talking about workplace. It has a natural calmness to it. I feel strongly that it can create a calm environment. And I think the key as well is providing spaces that have a diverse range, not to overuse the word diverse, but a diversity of space is also key when it comes to the lighting conditions in different areas. So yeah, there's some of my thoughts to kick things off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And now I'll move on to Jean with the very same question.
So Diane's introduction was fantastic, actually, because the way she was talking about the term or where it's come from, and we had a debate when we were doing the PAS about getting the terminology right at the beginning, and it went to and fro with what neurodiversity meant to different people. What we've ended up in the PAS isn't what everybody will agree with, I know. But we've kind of said neurodiversity was the whole thing, the whole umbrella term, within which there is neurotypical, neurodivergent, neurodegenerative, so it's dementia or something like that, and tried to kind of use it as an umbrella. Having said that, that PAS document is largely about people who experience sensory hypersensitivity. So, which means that someone's intensely sensitive to, it could be lighting, it could be acoustics or noise, it could be touch or smell. And it was those kinds of, that kind of bombardment on the senses that was causing the issue with the built environment and the very things that we were trying to take out. So for me, my knowledge of this area is very much about working with the steering group on the PAS, who had both lived and professional experience in this for many years. And what I learned during that 2-year period was not to take anything for, you know, as read. Basically, I would have people phoning me and saying, well, are you covering my condition? Like, well, it's not really about labels, but tell me how your condition affects you. And then it would very, very quickly become apparent that we were covering it. So the hypersensitivity to light, as Ruth has mentioned, and also aspects of light, like flicker or color temperature, and so on. but also noise patterns, visual, some people call visual noise. So it's kind of all of that. And I think I work in all types of buildings and of different ages. So I think for me, we can look at neurodiversity quite easily at any stage in the lifetime of a building or an office. So you might be renovating, or you might be just buying new lighting. That's the time to pick it up and try and look at all those considerations, which is really helpful. But I think the whole subject of neurodiversity has really brought home to me how much more we need to listen and respect the views across the whole of society. And for many neurodivergent people, they haven't had a seat at the table, they haven't had their voice heard, and I think that's all changing now, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. Such important points raised there around lived experience. I think, you know, professional experts have often forgotten that the people that live the experience are the experts of their own experience. So that's really, really great to hear the service user and carer involvement in the development of the PAS. Finally, Jessie, what does neurodiversity mean to you, and why does it matter?
Great, thanks, Paul. And just to dovetail off what Jean and Ruth and Diane had said, I think, you know, my own personal experience and work, and why does it matter? You know, everything I've heard resonates quite a bit with me as well. You know, and to me, neurodiversity is the concept that all people vary in terms of neurocognitive abilities and their experience to perceive the world differently, and there are various ways in which one can think, learn, and interact. And we've been, as architects and designers, we've been, you know, considering neurotypical minds in many projects, you know, as professionals, and I think that focusing on neurodivergence and you know, and thinking outside extents and bringing others in to learn from them through co-design, very much to what Jean had said, is you know, is very much tied to our work. And I think that designers have the potential to directly impact and influence the individual experiences people have in the built environment. And that's why it is so important that designers consider this type of thinking in their own work and its impacts to all people, you know, and the intersectionalities of all people, and that the built environment can foster unique strengths. It can alleviate stressors as well, and that it can truly create positive experiences for all neurodiverse minds. And I think that that's pretty powerful, you know, to be able to, and there's a big responsibility with that. And so, you know, knowing that the well-being of inhabitants is really in potential hands of those that are creating these built environments is why it matters to me.
Great, thank you very much, Jessie. I guess just to sort of bring that first question together, then, it seems there's a you know, overarching sort of feeling that we need to capture differences in people's perceptions, etc., and actually that the voice of those that live those experiences is super important. And I know, Ruth, you mentioned around inclusive design, this broadens out to inclusive design. So I'm now going to throw the awkward question that I often get asked, which is, well, that's great, but how do we balance the needs of multiple users in the built environment? And I'm going to go to Jean for that one first.
So I think it's clear from the PAS and neurodiversity work that's been done everywhere that it is a combination of always building design, but also building management and what happens in practice, how people are treated and so on. But I think when you look at neurodiversity anyway, you're already trying to balance one neurodivergent need from another. So we've kind of got to have different types of environments where we can. Now, in an office environment, it seems to me fairly easy, especially post-COVID, to have quieter areas, collaborative areas, because everybody by and large is, in most organisations now, I think, and Diane might correct me on this, is kind of booking a desk and coming in and maybe sometimes working at home as well. So there's much more flexibility than there used to be, which is really good. So I would say that in an office environment, typically you'd be aiming to have in some quiet zones, some collaborative zones, and some quiet rooms, or what I call as restorative reset spaces, just little ones people can go to when it becomes too much. How much you have of each will depend on the circumstances of your building and your staff. So some people might have a lot of collaborative areas and very small quiet floor for report writing and focus, and others may have it the other way around. I think those would be the key things, but I think the challenge is going to be when you've got someone who maybe is kind of forced into a role that is necessarily going to be really hectic and busy and bright and noisy. So, for example, being a receptionist isn't something you can kind of say, well, I want to be in a quiet focus zone all day. Or being the facilities manager, you're going to be moving around the building a lot and you won't have much choice of your environment. But I think for the majority, you can kind of design in different types of spaces and allow people, hopefully most people, have some choice about where they choose to work from, and in that way you get some balance, because we know we're not all the same type of people, are we? So we can choose.
Great, thanks, Jean. And as you mentioned, Diane, I'm going to jump straight over to you to pick up.
Okay, thank you. I think things have improved, certainly post-COVID. I think there are also some principles which we've agreed for everyone, or probably actually for no one. So I'm not sure that anybody does their best work in an open plan hot desk environment. There might be people who absolutely love it, but I'm not sure anybody does really. And actually one of the things that we get asked about in terms of a workplace adjustment, not just for neurodiversity, but often for neurodiversity, is things like a fixed desk in a hot desk environment, to mean that someone has their own space, their dedicated space, they can organise and set up how they want, and to alleviate the anxiety of actually, am I going to be able to sit somewhere where I know that the lighting is how I need it, where the sound is quiet if that's what's required, or even just to worry about where you're sitting and kind of proximity. I think where there are challenges is where there are conflicting needs. For example, in terms of lighting, if you have people who are neurodiverse and want lower level lighting, not everybody will, but that is quite often requested. But if you also have people with sight loss or visual impairments who might need actually very much brighter lighting, or people who need to be able to see very clearly to be able to lip read. So trying to organise your space so that you can enable people to work in a way that suits them. So whether you have, as Jean said, some quieter areas, some dedicated areas where actually they are brighter and can people see more, or where you can individualise and have individual desk lamps, temperature controls, whatever it is, so that you build in as much flexibility as possible. I think that really, really helps. Having said that about sight loss versus neurodiversity, both in very, very generic terms, you can have really good contrast that works for people with the visual impairment and still not make it too busy and cluttered and sensory overload. And I would completely agree with what everyone has said around lived experience, because nobody wants to get it wrong, but if you don't involve the widest possible range of people at the beginning, then you won't necessarily get it right. And one of the things that we also say is that inclusive design reduces but doesn't remove the need for individual adjustments. So you may still have people who need noise cancelling headphones, for example, because they have acute sensitivity to noise, and actually that's the best balance that you can come up with. And I mentioned our advice service, and we get all sorts of queries, and sometimes it's about being really creative and unpicking what a problem is. So one that springs to mind is somebody who was neurodiverse and had acute sensitivity to fragrance, and had obviously told their manager, who then contacted us and sort of gone, what do you do? Well, we're not going to say we've got a blanket policy on what fragrance you can wear, but actually when we sort of talked them through and said, actually, is it one of their colleagues, or is it cleaning products? Is it, you know, is there a way that you could remove it or remove them, or just doing something differently? So often it's about balancing needs and having a conversation and finding a compromise that works for people. And I think often people are just worried about having that conversation, whereas just talking about it, often you can find a creative solution.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. That's really, really useful. We'll go on to Jessie now for the same question on how do we balance the needs of multiple users.
Yeah, so I think you know, similar to Jean's points and Diane's points, and I think that the opportunity to balance multiple users is about the combination of managing sensory environments while also, and similar to the points made earlier, offering people choice and clarity and or refuge when with that opportunity to have that sense of calm. And so as an example, you know, for offering people choice, different acoustic qualities that can support focused work or, you know, or collaboration. If an environment can support social atmospheres, is very different than an environment that supports desk work and that focused work. So thinking that designers have the opportunity to think about the acoustic treatments of spaces and noise, and how that is considered in the way people work. Clarity, I think signage and wayfinding is a big part of thinking about the confidence and understanding that an occupant will have of that space. And again, that sense of calm. So you know, having that as an option and that as a choice in the design of work environments, I think is critical. And I think the piece earlier or the point earlier that Diane was making also, you know, about individual accommodation, I think it rings true that it's both built environment, but also operations, and how those two aspects of a work environment need to connect to really offer that degree of choice and support.
Great, thank you very much, Jessie. And finally, Ruth, how do we balance the needs, multiple needs?
Well, I mean, everyone's covered a huge amount already, but I think in terms of lighting, it is about, for me, I think the key is about providing a range of different kinds of space, as Jane has already mentioned, and others. And when it comes to lighting, you know, it's one of those environmental parameters that can really define those different spaces. So different light levels, but also different light directionality or level. So as in low level versus ceiling mounted, you know, we can create different languages around what those different spaces are for. We can signal that with lighting and with furniture, and being able to provide people with choice. It sounds great on paper. Obviously, you know, it's a process, and it means it has a direct impact on the design. But I think that a lot of workspaces are moving and have moved in that direction already. So, you know, as Jean was saying, we've already got a kind of almost an expectation that you're going to have an area that's a bit more open plan and noisy versus an area that's a bit more quiet and focused. But I think with lighting, we can really support that. And I think task lighting is a key as well, because it does give the opportunity to boost light levels for people with, say, visual impairment, or just because they're a bit older and they need things to be brighter, speaking from experience now. And I think, you know, we have this ability to use things like task lighting, which sounds so simple, but it's amazing how at the design stage of a new project, this can fall between the cracks because of the way the supply chain works, essentially, where task lighting is accounted for in the budget. But it is crucial, and standards like the WELL standard have already taken account of that and have encouraged the use of task lighting to enable building users to modify the light level to suit different kinds of user, mainly thinking about age. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, daylight, you know, I think it gives us a huge opportunity. It's from a sustainability point of view and also from an inclusivity point of view, because daylight generally is preferred by a lot of people. So, you know, even when we're talking about neurodiversity, I think it's rare that someone would have an aversion unless they had a physical, you know, allergy to direct sunlight, which I know exists. You know, there are sensitivities to glare, and also some of the work that I did quite a few years ago found that strong patterns created by direct sunlight can also be maybe a bit more distracting for some people with certain conditions, particularly autism. But again, you can't make a blanket statement for everyone. So, you know, I think what everyone has said already about including people who've got those perspectives, that's so important, and co-design is a really important part of that.
Great, thank you very much, Ruth. Well, I think you've all brought up some really, really interesting points, and to me it seems like we've solved the problem that we're trying to face here in giving people choice and factoring individual needs and hearing lived experience perspectives to enable that. But I guess when you go into the office spaces in the major cities, it doesn't necessarily play out in practice. So the kind of final big question we're gonna be faced with is what then are the key challenges and facilitators to enabling neurodiversity in the workplace design, sorry. And I'm going to go to Jesse for that one first.
Thanks, Paul. I just actually wanted to also mention to Ruth's point earlier, it was mentioned about WELL, and we didn't really touch on the fact of regulations and standards that exist, and how co-design can actually be an opportunity to go beyond current benchmarks to provide more understanding and opportunity in design. And I guess that dovetails nicely into this next point that you had raised about what are the key challenges or opportunities in workplace design. So we had the opportunity to work on one of BDP's recent studios in Toronto for 250 people. You know, this is coming after the pandemic and thinking now of hybrid working. And you know, and through that process, we worked to design this space where the design of the office should make people want to come back from home. It should be a destination that can be supportive of different types of spaces for different types of working, thinking, and doing. And that's what was done at in the design of the new studio, and leveraging benchmarks and leveraging research had shown that offering collaboration, offering focus, offering relaxation zones can really create support a more productive day. And that's exactly the way that the new studio was designed, with a range of spaces that vary in lighting, views, feel, and composition. And so the design of the new studio had a neurodivergent lens, as well as an intersectionality of different needs for creating this new hybrid work environment. Balancing the design of different work environments for both open collaboration and reduced stimuli. And so just some examples of how that was accomplished. So the studio is set up by different neighborhoods, And these neighborhoods are buffered with meeting spaces in each zone to help individuals, with hearing sensitivities, for example, to allow for more smaller areas to create more intimate environments when needed. The main executive boardrooms and meeting rooms are actually devoid of color and distraction. And this was tied to research and leveraging that design to create a visually quiet space to allow for more focused discussion and concentration. And then, of course, providing that opportunity and variety of places to work to support different needs and the freedom of choice to work how you need to. So areas that will help you focus with no distraction, collaboration areas with choice, and alcoves to make people feel more comfortable and safe, and calm spaces, and of course the senses tying into that, lighting control, air quality, also so important through the new design of the space. And there are social and gathering spaces as well, and that those were clustered in more public zones to again give direct choice for when team members wish to be more social. And beyond the design of the space, as an organization as well, working through the hybrid working model is key to the success of the future of work at BDP and at Human Space. And so providing flexible working hours has been a key way to reduce anxieties of staff by making it less stressful for travel to the office during the day, or choosing to avoid busy times that may be occurring in the office setting, and allowing people to start at different times of day. So again, it's the design and it's the operations of the space, and thinking about working in a hybrid setting that has been so important to the new office.
Great, thank you very much for that example, Jesse. That's really, really interesting. On to you, Ruth, for your account of what are the key facilitators and barriers.
So I think in the workplace sector, there's a huge barrier here, which is the speculative office, the Cat A model. And the issue there is that we have this office where we don't actually know who's going to be working there. And so being able to design the sort of the base level of servicing to suit a variety of users can be a real challenge. And I think one of the issues might be for clients that they will see dollar signs or pound signs, and they will feel that there is a cost associated with adding that level of provision for notional users that may or may not come to work there. But I'd like to think that we are moving past that. From a sustainability point of view, it's very problematic as well. So, there's been a lot of conversations for a number of years about why that approach is problematic. And I can see that more and more businesses are looking for spaces that they can lease for maybe shorter periods. And this was happening before the pandemic, where they can customize things. And so I think, one of the ways to overcome that challenge is around diversity of space. Rather than trying to make the existing services do everything, you create a range of spaces in which there are different conditions. So again, I know and I think many of us have talked about a range of spaces, but I risk sounding idealistic. We just provide a range of spaces and then it's all fine. Of course, that's not necessarily the case, but I do think that that's going to be the key. And that is what employers want too. And it's what people want. It's what workers want. And as Jesse was saying, we're in a world now where we need to design spaces that will make people want to come out of their home office or their home desk, and because that's the situation we're in now. We need people to want to come to that place, and if that place is not working for them, then why would they leave the safety of their homework environment? So that's what we need to do, and you know, so we do need to find ways to overcome those challenges.
Great, thanks, Ruth. I think that's a really, really interesting point, that the speculative office seems to be a major barrier. Yet I would think that building the old-fashioned shell-style office was a kind of waste of money anyway, because actually every workforce is relatively diverse, and they'll be diverse in different ways. But ultimately, if you have these different spaces, then they'll probably meet the needs of the vast majority, irrespective of what company goes into that space. Really interesting point. I'll go to Diane to pick up this question. In your experience, what have been the key barriers and facilitators? I suspect you probably faced a few barriers.
Quite a lot. I think first understanding and involving people, and understanding why things are important and why people need different things and what needs doing. By definition, the organisations we work with are kind of the converted. And for them, some of the really practical things are cost of retrofitting, where they are in premises, in offices, in customer-facing environments, which have not been designed inclusively, have not been designed with neurodiversity or other disability in mind. And there are various kind of numbers quoted around this, but the one that sticks in my head is that retrofitting is 100 times more expensive than designing inclusively. I think that's from Network Rail. So for them, often actually it's physically thinking about what they can change, what's kind of within their gift, if they can't actually change everything and they can't actually start from scratch. So even things, I mean, I love what Ruth was talking about lighting, but natural light rather than artificial, or even changing the kind of lighting or light bulbs you use, or individualizing. So kind of getting beyond, well, we're stuck where we are, to okay, but we could tweak things a bit. And we also encourage organizations who are thinking about, for example, climate change and thinking about their carbon footprint and maybe moving or downsizing, actually think about inclusion in the broadest sense at the same time. Take that opportunity to get it right in every way for everybody. I think there's also quite a bit about challenging preconceptions. So I mentioned noise cancelling headphones, and that's a particular favourite, because often I say to people, you know, that could be a good adjustment. And the person who manages the adjustments or accommodation process says, well, you know, if I do that for this person, everyone will want one. Well, really? They probably won't, because most people don't want things they don't need. But actually, if everybody then needs them, that probably tells you something about the effectiveness of your working environment. And also, you know, reframing this from being a cost as well to being a productivity tool. So actually, it's enabling people to do their job well. So don't think about actually the price tag, but this is enabling a human to do the job they've been employed to do. Jessie touched on this around transport and work times, but I think how people use the space as well is really important. So the accessibility of the broader transport infrastructure, that flexibility to come in at different times, different shift patterns. Home working, of course, is a mix of this and blending this. Things like understanding how people communicate. Things like dress codes, actually. So I work with somebody for who is autistic, and it's really important to her that actually fabrics that she wears are soft. So if you have a very, very strict corporate dress code, that may not be compatible with that. So there's all sorts of things, and around language, you know, use of colloquialisms, how you expect people to engage in social sort of activities. It's all part of how people use their working environment. And I completely agree with Ruth that, you know, customization and as much choice as possible is really important. But being able to offer choice and being honest about what you can change and that you are trying to get it right, I think can go an awful long way as well.
Great, thank you very much. Really lovely, comprehensive account again. So thanks, Diane. Jean, I was wondering if you could talk to this point around the key challenges and facilitators, and perhaps if you have an example of a project or something to bring it to life as well, that would be fantastic.
I do, great. So we've just been working on RNIB, so Royal National Institute for the Blind headquarters. So they've moved to an existing building, which then had to be renovated for their specific needs. And they've got low vision clinics as well as their offices and a shop, recording studios and all sorts of things in there. So obviously a key design requirement for them was around sight loss. But when I mentioned the PAS, which hadn't quite been published at the time we were introduced, but I was working on and knew what it was going to look like, would they like to follow it? They did want to. There's a huge appetite. So it was really interesting for me to kind of test the waters to how we take something like neurodiversity and then the very different needs sometimes of sight loss, and how come we can meet both needs. And I'll give a couple of examples on this. The first one was on lighting, whereas Ruth has touched on quite a lot. Where we have some open plan office environments, we've got quiet floor and we've got collaborative floors, but the lighting needs to be very different for people with full sight and for different sight conditions. And we did some user trials. So this is the great thing, when you do know who the occupier is going to be, you can kind of do that co-design process. And that very quickly showed that most people with sight loss require a more bluer light to get the clarity. They're quite like a not necessarily brighter, but definitely in color temperature terms more blue. Whereas most people who experience hypersensitivity want a warmer light and find the blue light very intensive and intrusive to their concentration and so on. So we, with working with our lighting designers, we have got each bank of 4 desks has got the option to take the light level up and down, as in the dimming process, as well as color temperature. And that's worked really well. But because it works for a bank of 4 desks, where you would think, well, there's a compromise here. If you go to that, bank of desks, there might be somebody else in that bank of 4. So that's where management comes in. So management making it known in a sensory mapping type of environment around the building, giving that advanced information to say, this is where these different banks of desks are set to as a default. If you want something different, you could try and change it, but you obviously got to get agreement across the 4 desks. They've also got, I think it's one of their own products, a little desk lamp. I love these task lamps when they're done well. I think they're really good. And that had color temperature as well as the up and down dimming, which is great, because light obviously mixes. So you can have a bluer light above, but then a warmer light on your desk and vice versa, to kind of give you more choice. So I thought that was great. But I think the sensory mapping is key. And I think you can use sensory mapping, like we've done air quality on some of our office floors now, where you can kind of see the reading. And this was done at the start. I think COVID was quite a driver to that. I think you can do a similar thing around the whole experience. So, for example, Diane mentioned this about previously we had tethered or anchored desks that were bespoke for somebody and they could tailor it to what they wanted. If we can't have that, can we at least have sensory mapping that tells you where a desk is, how close it is to the T points, how far is it from the toilets, how good is it for evacuation, how bright is it, what sort of daylight are you getting? Is that the bright side of the building, or is that in the morning and then perhaps not in the afternoon? If we give people all that information, they can then make informed decisions about where they'd like to work, and hopefully develop coping mechanisms and ways around it. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There are challenges, and a lot of it is around the facility managers driving some of those challenges, as well as the designers.
Yeah, great.
So there was one other example I can quickly mention. In sight loss organisations, they quite often have a flare path, which is cut into the flooring, and it's usually a different colour and a different floor material. And they were originally going to have that RNIB because they have it in the other offices. But one of the things we said in the PAS was to have 2 adjacent floor finishes that contrast a lot can sometimes be counterproductive. It introduces more visual noise apart from anything else. But someone who's older, and we had a lot of older people going into the ground floor of RNIB, so might have perhaps Parkinson's or dementia, and they can quite often not step across a colour change, a distinct colour change in the flooring. So we've put the flare path in, but we've put it almost the same colour as the adjacent carpet, but it is a very different tactile finish. It's a vinyl with some circles on it, and the long cane users can pick it up. People can detect it underfoot. So we've still got the flare path, but we haven't got kind of that visual noise going on. So, but you only come up with those solutions when you can talk to the end users usually to just kind of test it as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jean. And I keep banging on about this, but the end user involvement is just so crucial, and I genuinely can't believe it hasn't been recognized as like the key factor. A mobile phone designer wouldn't design it without doing end user assessments. But anyway, on the points you just raised, Jean, we've got a question from the floor that asks, when you mentioned sensory mapping, they ask who can provide this service?
I think any organisation can do that themselves, usually. Any facilities team, they'll have floor plans and they'll be able to kind of colour code the desks for different lighting situations, or which ones are kind of nearer to, you know, which ones have openable windows, which ones, you know, you better see on plan where the toilets are in relation to them, or where the noisy T-point area is. So if you're someone who doesn't like noise, you're not going to go and pick a desk that's right next to the T-point, really. You're going to go pick something. Many people in neurodivergent prefer corner conditions, or their backs to a wall, because it feels like you can kind of control what's happening in your visual field better. So people can see that on plan and they can pick it. And for many organisations now, they might even be able to add in the air quality and the thermal and everything else, because lighting and acoustics were the biggest aspects in when we were doing the background research, some of which was done by Helen Hamlin Society actually prior to the PAS starting. So lighting and noise were the big ones, but it is also around you know, the smells and the busyness of the place and the temperature and everything else as well. And different people are susceptible to different things, so we kind of, you know, not everyone's the same. It's quite a spectrum there.
Great, thanks, Jean. And that leads on to another question from the floor, actually, that says, most of the conversation was about lighting, but is there other factors and areas of mitigations, for example, in thermal comfort and noise? And I know, Diane, you mentioned noise reducing headphones, but I wondered, Jesse, if you had any thoughts on this question.
Yes, I think from an auditory stimuli point of view and things to consider, you know, are there designated quiet spaces for people who are sensitive to noise? You know, so we've spoken about that through this session. Other considerations, can finishes with high sound absorption be used to reduce echoes? Can acoustic panels be used? Is there equipment that produces noise in the space? Can that be turned off when it's not in use? Are rooms soundproofed to prevent excessive noise? Is there music in the space? Can that be played at a lower volume? Can there be time where there is no music in the work environment? You know, so you think about a retail setting, you know, a different type of work environment, or a hospitality setting where there tends to be music. So considering those sound considerations can definitely support in neurodiverse inclusive space.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question that's just come in that I will confess I don't actually understand, because I don't know what a Cat A office is, but what are the best solutions for Cat A offices? And I'll go to Diane for that.
I wouldn't, because like you,
Okay.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, well, that's all right.
I'm so sorry.
At least I don't feel so bad. Let's go to Ruth. Do you know what a Cat A office is?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Cat A is what I was just talking about earlier. It's speculative office development, where what we do is we provide an office that's kind of ready to lease. So it's got all the base services, it's got ceilings and lighting and heating and cooling, but it doesn't have any furniture in it. And it's a model that's been around in this country for a very long time, and it drives a lot of the real estate industry in commercial office space. And on paper, you know, it makes sense, because you have this empty office and you show it to potential tenants and they say, yeah, this is about the right size, it's in the right location, you know, I'll take it. But from a sustainability and from the point of view of what we're talking about today, you know, it has the issues that I've talked about already, where you're then trying to design this kind of baseline space for people that you don't know who they are. You know, it's really great when you do know who the occupier is going to be, and you can understand, you can workshop with them what their needs are going to be. I think that's beneficial for everyone. But in the case of Cat A, there's no easy answer here, but I do think that, and I can really only speak with authority about lighting here, but I think the solution is layering. So it's about having a base level of illumination, and then understanding that the tenant, it will be beholden to them to layer up on top of that with task lighting, and that's more sustainable, and it also is just a lot more adaptable for everybody. It's also about infrastructure that allows things to be changed to suit different users, and that comes across everything from different types of use of the space to, you know, different business uses to neurodiversity and accommodations for people. So you know, moving things around, basically having a system that allows you to connect and disconnect things easily can really facilitate that. So you know, that would be my attempt at a short answer to that question. I hope it helps.
Yeah, no, that's really useful, and now I know what a Cat A office is as well, so that's even better. Before we kind of wrap up, I just asked the panel if there's anything that they wanted to mention before we say some concluding thoughts that haven't come up. Yes, Jean?
It was just Jessie had mentioned, touched on the aspect of music and whether it could be turned down and stuff. There is there's some new work going on at the moment looking at soundscape and this introduction of sounds to environments. And so, for example, some of us might like the sound of running water and find that very therapeutic. It's quite a common one to like, or bird song. But for some people, it's intensely annoying if you know it's not a real stream or real birds and so on. So we are all different. So it's kind of just a warning that, you know, introducing noise can sometimes feel very pleasant for some people, but not for others. And I think the idea of turning it down or making it really low volume and then other people being able to control that as to what they personally can hear can be really, really helpful. And there's some other work going on diversity in streets. So that's neurodiversity in streets, and some more work on lighting in hospitals. So I think what that PAS document is really the first step. And hopefully, you know, and all of these types of conversations will help lots of people to think of lots of things to research and what we need to know more about.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Jean. And it links to someone's asked, is there one source of data? And the PAS, I guess, is kind of the first step in that direction, really, isn't it, for people to turn to if they're looking for. Yeah,
and there are lots. There's a huge biography at the back of all the kind of reading that fed into that. So if anybody wants a deeper dive, they could go there for a start. I mean, there might be somewhere else. Jessie might know of others. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's. It might be helpful if maybe we put together a list of some resources to share, because there's lots out there that we can pool together and share.
Yeah, that'd be great, Jessie. Right, so just as I'm conscious of time, I suppose it's been a fascinating conversation. Really, really great to hear from our expert panel, and some of the key things that seem to come up are around choice, listening to people, and in fact, if an offer is a speculative offer, there is plenty of research that's listened to people. So whilst it's not necessarily quite as good as actually listening to real people using spaces, there is stuff we can draw on, providing a range of different types of spaces, because actually we're all different. We like to homogenize humans, and I don't really understand why, because every single one on this panel is different, and let alone the audience as well. And I think that this is the start of a bigger conversation. I think it's really, really great that these conversations are now being had, and these issues are being raised. So I'd just finally like to say thank you very much to the panelists, and to our audience for the questions, and for the BCO for hosting the event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Everybody. Thank you.